All right. A little back feedback. Sorry about that, people. Let's see. Over the past 15 years, Doug has written for such companies as the CW Network, CBS, DC Comics, Image Comics, Dynamite Entertainment, Top Cow Productions, and 12 Gauge Comics. Doug Wagner, best known for his created own work on that guy. A little bit of feedback. Um, Best known for his creative works on Image Comics, Vinyl, Plastic, The Hard Place, The Ride, Burning Desire. Other works include Batman, Arkham Origins, Legends of the Dark Knights, World of Warcraft, Blood Sworn, Thomas River with Brian Stelfree, Spy Fatale, Battle Royale with Hoyt Sylvia. Let's bring in Doug. See? Oh. Can everybody see Doug? Doug, are you showing up okay?
Hey, can you guys see me and hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right.
A little feedback here. All right, Doug. I hope everybody can see him in our screen right now.
So there I
There you
am.
are. Cool.
We got a couple people joining in. The Den of Geek, Gaz, Cutthroat Comics.
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Hopefully, no more feedback. Um, Doug, I would like to welcome you, first of all. It's an honor to have you here as my first guest on my channel. I just told the people a brief history of the companies you have written more in the past. Also, we spoke about some of the current comic books you have written that you have created on your own with other artists. Before we go into our show, why don't you tell us how you got into writing comics? Also, what kind of comics you liked as a kid growing up?
Oh man, I mean that's always a long story. I'll try to keep it, not try to bore people too long, but like I'll just start from the beginning. Like, when you look back at things, from when you're older and see what you did as a kid, like I realized like I was always a writer. Like I was always creating stories even at the age of 5 and and come up with that stuff. And probably around that same age is when I bumped into like a comic rack, the old school stuff you hear at 7-Eleven. And kind of immediately was drawn in by like stuff like the Flintstones and Casper and Wendy the Witch and those kind of things, obviously for kids comics, and just adored those from step one, especially the Flintstones. Loved the Flintstones. And then as I got older and kept going to 7-Eleven, I bumped into, like, one day I was looking at the stands and I bumped into actually an issue of Fantastic Four, and it had Silver Surfer on it. And I don't know why, but Silver Surfer kind of drew me in. And from that point forward, I became a superhero guy. So then it was, found Avengers and all those kind of things. You know, Obviously during the John Byrne, Chris Claremont era of X-Men on Uncanny, I kind of got sucked into that, and that was probably my favorite comic, probably still of all time. And then, believe it or not, in high school, I bumped into Cully Hamner. He and I went to the same high school,
Oh,
and
wow.
we started just creating comics for fun. Like we were just doing it, just because we were bored teenagers.
Right.
And at the age of 17, it kind of dawned on me. I went like, "Hey, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life: is do nothing but write comics." Now, of course, there was a path to that. That's like plenty of rejection, plenty of like going to cons and meeting editors and getting turned down a lot. You kind of get used to that after a while, and sending rejection after sending submission after submission and getting rejected time and time again. And then finally, the first time I got my break was with Malibu Comics. Hank Knault's. I was introduced to Hank Knault's, and he and I got together and started. I did an issue of Ultra Force, just as Marvel had bought Malibu and closed them down. So I managed to sneak in one comic before Marvel closed them down. And then it
Wow.
took a couple more years, like that kind of hit me hard. And so like it took me a couple more years to kind of recoup from that. And then Kevin Gardner, the president of 12 Gauge, and I were sitting, just hanging out on the couch just before 12 Gauge was even a name.
Right.
And we did the same thing we all do as fans, right? You're like, hey, if I was running Marvel, I would do this, or if I was writing the X-Men, I'd do that. The
Right.
same armchair quarterback stuff we all love to do and dream about. And I can't remember which one of us said it, but one of us said, maybe we should put our money where our mouth is. And luckily, we had developed relationships over years of going to cons and stuff with many artists. And we decided to do the ride. And we got lucky enough to where, like, we put together a pitch and we sent that to Image Comics and they approved it. And that kind of started, that was like my reintroduction as a professional into comics. And then from there on, it was just like, hey, man, I got my second chance. I'm not letting go of this. So I grabbed that tiger by the tail. And then it was just like continuing, still sitting out pitches to this day and still getting rejections. That's just all part of the game. And, past that, it was just like, hey, I got, I did more creator owned stuff. I did more stuff for DC Comics.
Right.
Um, and it was just one of those fun things to where it was just like, hey, it was just kind of like a momentum effect. And so like you once you get the ball rolling, you jump in there and hang on tight.
Wow. 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 I want to get into a little bit about the past of comic books. I'm going to do about 4 questions to you, and we'll go very slowly.
Okay.
And my first question to you: what do you think about the past writing of comic books during the 70s, 80s, and early 90s?
Wow. I mean, obviously that you're speaking to my generation because that's when, I was into comics as only a reader for the most part.
Right.
And it's interesting when you look back on it because like, you can look back at like those old Stan Lee stuff, and
Right.
there would be entire panels filled with nothing but dialogue and maybe an eye of a character,
Mm,
and so a lot of words, a lot of dialogue, a lot of narration. And then I think, I think Chris Claremont is probably one of the bigger impacts on comic writing that I don't think people give him enough credit for. Like he kind of changed the game because he came in and he said, "Hey, here's how you write an ongoing that doesn't have necessarily every issue is self-contained," and kind of started backing off a little bit on the dialogue, and the narration.
yeah.
And then obviously, you hit the 90s, or especially early 90s when the Image guys hit it. And then
Oh,
it was like, maybe not enough dialogue, and then a lot of really amazing art and cool action. But like, so you saw like this interesting like how the word count for Stan Lee and those guys back in the early 70s was really high, and then it slowly got less and less all the way up into the 90s. And then I think we hit the 90s, and people went, "Well, this is fun to look at, but I'm not really reading it." And then
right.
we saw the shift back, to like, "Hey, let's get back to telling stories with action. Can we combine all this and make it even better?"
Right.
Yeah, that's what I think anyway.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you. I mean, I got into comics in the 70s. Probably late 70s. And I think my very first one, I went into a comic store with my dad and I picked up the Hulk.
Mhm.
But it was, I think, a graphic novel. It was a whole bunch of Hulk comics. And I just was enthralled by seeing this creature. And then I was like, wow, this is really, really cool. And it wasn't until the early 90s that I really got into comics. And that, of course, was Batman, Superman, X Men, X Force,
Mhm.
and you had Image Comics later on in the 90s. And, really great time because you had all these classic um, artists leaving Marvel, going on their own, saying, hey, we want to do something different. And look what Todd McFarlane has done Spawn,
Yeah.
Jim Lee.
Yeah.
Uh, I think it was Wildcats.
Yep.
And Rob Liefeld, I forget what he did. I know he did Deadpool for Marvel for many years. I don't know what he did in Image because I
His
was
first book was Youngblood.
Youngblood. Okay,
Mhm.
I wasn't really too much into Rob Liefeld at the time, but Todd, Jim Lee. Chris Claremont. You know,
Mhm.
all those guys were talented,
Oh yeah.
and a lot of people said, "Well, I like Todd McFarlane better." And I'm like, "Okay, that's your opinion."
Yeah.
Um, but I think there were some things I didn't like that Todd McFarlane did with Batman.
Hmm.
Sometimes I didn't like the way he drew the capes, and but I had to get past that. My next question to you is: do you feel writers in the past wrote stories that made readers feel that they were part of the story as they read comic books like Batman, Superman, and Spider Man?
Oh, I think so. I think the reason why a lot of those characters have stood the test of time is because of a lot of that early stuff where you felt like you could relate with Batman and Superman and Spider-Man and the X-Men and all those kind of things, and they kind of drew you in, and it became very personal stories.
Hmm.
I mean, you look at like Daredevil. I mean, they're about to do the Born Again, TV show, and I
Right,
mean that comic back in those days was groundbreaking because it was so personal.
right,
Spider-Man, you always felt for him because here's Uncle Ben who had passed, died because of your lack of responsibility. And then the Gwen Stacy storyline and stuff like that, and Batman and Superman and the Teen Titans back in those days, Uncanny X-Men were all the same in my opinion. They really drew you in and made you feel like you were part of the team, like you were a part of the character itself,
right.
and you fell in love with them. And I think that's, even if the story wasn't necessarily the best that month, you still loved Wolverine. You still loved Batman.
Hmm. Yeah,
Like you still love those characters. And they were just fantastic at like drawing you in and making you feel like you were not just a reader of the comic, but you were actually part of the story.
yeah. I feel that's what's kind of missing in comics today, but writers are slowly trying to get back to it.
Hmm.
I think it was late '90s. I didn't feel it. I didn't feel because some of the writers, the good writers, were leaving Marvel or DC, and then new writers were coming on. And I think when you came to do DC comics to start doing Batman, that's when I started getting more into Batman again
Oh, thank you.
because um, you drew me in. It's like, okay, people of other writers have done this type of format for many, many years, and they're not going to stop their format because it works. But when you get a new writer, I feel it's fresh, it's new. What is he going to do with Bruce Wayne's character? What is he going to do with Batman's character? And I think I liked the Azrael character when they did it in, I think it was late '90s. Azrael was in late
Oh yeah,
'90s.
I think you're right. Yeah, around there.
And I thought that was more like, kind of like in between like fantasy and the old Knights of the Republic, kind
Hmm.
of feel with knights and helmets and everything, kind of feel. But okay, let me go on to the next question. Do you feel writers in the mid '90s were writing storylines that would shock their readers to get more comic book sales?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think that's there's always been that case. I mean, even if you look back at like some of the 70s and 80s, I mean, dude, they just put it right on the cover, right? They'd be like, Silver Surfer dies this issue,
Right.
So they were always like trying to press you to like get that response. But I do think like there's some validity to what you're saying. Like in the 90s, it kind of had to almost become like regular, almost monthly. Like, hey, can we shock the reader kind of thing? And and then, yeah, I mean, hey, if that works, it's fine. But like, I don't think it's necessarily like you have to do it every month. But again, there's editorial direction too. So who knows? Like they might have been demanding, hey, make sure you do this, and we're hitting these kind of notes every month.
Mhm. I think what was shocking was when they killed off Superman.
Hmm.
And a lot of people were saying, how can you kill off Superman? He's incredibly strong. He can do much everything that he possibly can. And then you have this one creature that comes down and just basically destroys him, and kills him. And everybody's like, well, he's dead. And then they did a whole spin off of all these different Supermans. And I think when DC did that, Marvel was like, I like that. Maybe
Mhm.
we should do something similar, but with Spider Man.
Yep.
And then there was a whole spawn of different Spider Mans. And I think people liked that. It was, you're getting so many different comics from so many different writers. And you got Marvel over here, and you got DC competing. Who's going to come out on top? You know.
Right.
But do you think you can shock people without just killing off a character? And you know, I know there was one point. I think they were trying to make Superman gay.
Yeah. I
I don't know when that was. Maybe someone in the chat can tell me. But I think at one point they were just grasping at straws. Do you see?
Well, I think too. I mean, look at you. You can't argue the success of the Death of Superman comic, right? Like, I mean, how many millions of copies did that sell? And
A lot.
so, when you're talking to the corporate overlords, they're like, "Hey, Superman just sold 10 million copies of one issue." You know what they're going to say to you. We'll make that happen for us.
Right.
And so then it became, break Batman's back. Let's kill Spider-Man. Let's kill off Wolverine. And it just became like this, kind of like, hey, we know these issues will sell. And then, of course, that was great for the end of the 90s. But then when you hit the 2000s, everybody was like, yeah, you've killed Superman 3 times. Now we don't care anymore. Like,
Exactly.
it's like, you kind of get bored with it.
You know what I think Marvel didn't do enough of was Punisher and Daredevil. I see Daredevil coming back now
Hmm.
because I've picked up some new issues, and I think they kind of relaunched Daredevil with a different outfit, different person, and I think they're trying to see what people like. And I don't know why they haven't brought Punisher back yet. Maybe they have, and maybe that's on the back shelf, and maybe
Yeah.
they'll bring it on later. I know Blade is very popular too. Uh,
Yeah.
Blade did on the comics. I think he did one of his meeting his daughter for the first time, and I thought that was interesting.
Hmm.
Crossover from Blade, and then having his daughter have the same abilities as Blade has, but she's a teenager and
Hmm.
she's learning things and not knowing why her father wasn't around her whole life. I thought that was kind of interesting. It was a different take on it.
Yeah.
Okay, my next question. What writers do you like from the past, starting with the 70s, going through to the end of the 90s?
Yeah. I mean, we already mentioned Chris Claremont, who's will always be like have a huge impact. I mean, it's hard to say. Like, there were so many great writers back then. You know what I mean? So it's hard for me to like mention all of them. So I'm just going to go with uh, Denny O'Neil, who did the
Yeah,
Question for a while, and Chris Claremont as my two top. Like, both of those guys wrote stuff that like blew my mind. You're reading it going, "Oh, I didn't know you could do that in a comic."
right,
Like, and I don't mean like necessarily like shock value stuff. Like, this comic is so good, I didn't realize comics could be this well done.
right,
Those two guys, and obviously, I mean, dude, there's so many. Larry Hama, and I mean, the list goes on and on. Dan Jurgens did some incredible stuff, especially during the '80s. Um,
mhm.
so yeah, the list is endless. Like, it'd be impossible. I could sit here and just think up names for like a half hour. But those guys like Chris Claremont and Denny O'Neil, may be probably my two favorite writers of comics of all time.
Oh wow. I started getting into. I didn't even know they wrote Batman. The Kuberts.
Oh yeah,
I think Andy and someone else. I
there's
think
Andy and Adam. They're brothers.
right. And his, I guess they have a daughter, Emma Kubert,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and she's done stuff for Image as well.
Hmm.
Stoneheart.
Hmm.
I really thought that was a really good comic book because it had a little bit of her personality.
Hmm.
Uh, and it's kind of funny how writers take their own personality and put it in a comic for a
Yeah.
character. And some people go, why do writers do that? And I feel like writers do that because they want to take something and make that character more a little interesting and maybe putting your a little bit of yourself into the comic book character is going to make it probably, I don't know, is it easier for you to write when it's you know that there's a little bit of personality in there
Yeah,
of you?
I think for me, like, you have to find, like, you'll find, and this happened same for me when early in my career,
Mhm.
I was trying to write comics that sounded like Denny O'Neil and Chris Claremont and Larry Hama. So I was trying to channel those guys and trying to write for the audience.
Right.
And then you kind of like try to find what they call your voice. And
Uh-huh.
that there's no way you can hide your personality when you find your voice. And your voice is like, hey, this is my humor. This is my, this is how I do things. And so you can't help but kind of like put part of your personality in what you're writing. And
Right.
that's where you find the true love. And honestly, that's I think where you find the best stories, because then it becomes personal. If you can identify, like we were talking about earlier, if you and I can identify with a character in a story like Batman,
Right.
fall in love with that character, when
Hmm.
things do happen to him, it means more.
Right. Right.
And so I think, you're just searching for that personal connection. That's why I think you see some of the personality of each writer come in through their stories, is because they want it to be personal.
Gotcha. And I think that's great how you wanted to channel different writers and everything.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes when I'm writing, I like to have music in the background when I'm writing. And some people say it's distracting, but for me, I think it engages me more. And I've written, like 3 issues in like uh, 2 or 3 days with music going. And
Mhm.
but I've heard that, I don't know if this is true, but with some writers, um, some like to write more at night, and
Mhm.
some like to write more in the early morning. What time do you like to write when you are creating a new comic book?
Yeah, for me, I mean, it's I my schedule's a little crazy, for most people, but like I'm definitely a night owl. So I usually don't wake up till 10 or 11 in the morning. And then, the first hour or two is just emails and then the management stuff you typically have to do as a writer, with artists and colorists and those kind of things.
Right,
And so my perfect time to write is usually like between 1 and 7. Sometimes, like, I'll make it even to 9 or 10, depending on how the day is going.
right,
And then it's okay. Well, now let's eat a really late dinner, watch a little bit of TV, and go to bed.
right.
So mine's usually like I'd say 1 to 9, 1 to 10 is my perfect writing time.
And at that time, you don't want to be interrupted, and you don't want to be taking emails and stuff like
Oh
that.
yeah, yeah. You try to block all that stuff out. It's not, I mean, sometimes I get called, the old man, because like I turn off social media. I can't handle the dings. Like I'm not one of those people that can ignore them.
Oh yeah.
Now I'll listen to music. Now when I'm actually writing, um,
Hmm.
it has to be music without words. But there's a lot of stuff, like a lot of times I'll take, say, 10, 20, even 30 minutes of listening to music that maybe does have words, and kind
Hmm.
of get me in the right mindset of that character and what kind of tone I want to hit for that story.
Right, right.
So
Do you like more horror, or do you like just coming up with an idea? Oh,
yep, this
yeah.
is this is my big boy Abe. He's not gonna leave me alone.
He's like, I need some TV time.
Yep. Oh, dude, I love it all. I won't lie. Like, I love horror. I love dark comedy, obviously, because that's, I think, what I do most of. Um, Sci-fi is probably, sci-fi and horror comedy are probably my favorites. And of course, the occasional action film. I love a good action film.
Right. For me, I'm working on a horror comic book as well, and I just felt horror was a good way to start. And I had this idea, a long time ago that was basically a movie script. And I said, how do I condense a movie script into a comic book?
Yeah.
And I did not know the first thing about the formula for writing. So
Mhm.
I went online, and I think there was a lot of writers showing how they do their formula. And I'm
Mhm.
sure you have a different formula for writing as well.
Oh, yeah, everybody's got their own approach. There's no, I always say there's no 2 ways or the same way is never duplicated. Like how one writer writes versus how another writer writes. There's no right or wrong. It's just you have your way. You got to figure out which way works for you.
And I was going on this one YouTube stream, and this one guy was saying that he wrote typically like this, and he broke it down and everything. He said, you've got to get really detailed about what the character is doing, and then your action, and then I guess like the pals, whatever is going to be in the comic in that particular panel.
Hmm.
And I thought that was good, so I kind of went off some of his stuff, and but once I started writing, I had my own formula, and I was
Yeah.
like, hey, this works for me. Maybe that works for him. I think, like you said, there is no wrong way of writing a comic book. Even I notice Cato, this guy who does basically figure reviews, he
Hmm.
came up with the idea for a comic. He said, I'm not really a writer. So I guess he puts it on a tape and does it that way. And I said, well, that's kind of interesting. I've never seen a writer do dictation, basically on a tape, and then go to the artist and say, well, here, listen to this. I don't really know how to write, you know, but it's got to be good, right? It's like, it's just a different style.
Oh yeah. Hey, what if you can find an artist that'll deal with that? Or you learn to have that dictation turned into text for them to read, kind of thing. I mean, there's so many different ways.
Yeah.
And I mean, listen, I experiment. I've always experimented with that, and still to this day experimented. I tried the dictation thing; it never worked for me. I don't know what it is about sitting in front of the desk and in front of a keyboard.
Yeah.
You've written. Like
Yeah.
sometimes there'll be 15 minutes that go by where all I'm doing is thinking about what I'm going to write next.
Right.
I'm not actually like typing. So like, I mean, hey, it's whatever works for you and gets the best of what you think you're trying to achieve out. I
Right.
think that's a tough part. It's like, and like I said, everybody's different. I mean, every artist I've talked to is different. Every writer I've talked to is different. Um, it's just what works for you. Like,
Right. Absolutely. Okay. Next, I'm going to get into the present day of comic books. I'm going to have 4 questions as well. Do you think superhero and comic books has their run or interest with readers diminish or it's increased?
that's, I think, no, because I think you have to divvy up the MCU as far as
Yes.
like movies, film, and TV, because obviously that has gone up.
Right.
With comics, I think just looking at typical sales numbers, you can't deny that it has gone down. But I think that's not necessarily because comics are worse or better. I don't think that's the argument. I think the argument would be as we've gotten older
Hmm.
and technology has become what it has become,
Right.
it's tougher to get young readers to start picking up comics out of the blue. Because like you and I already said, like you and I picked them up in grocery stores and they were everywhere. And now the only place you can get them is a comic shop. And I think that decision decades ago is going to come back to haunt us because now I mean, we didn't pick it up because our mom took us to the grocery store to pick up comics. We just bumped into them as kids because we were bored, didn't have anything else to do.
Oh, yeah. And I think I would go by the coloring book aisle and there's comic books
Hmm.
right there. And it's like, what do I ask my mom for? Comic book or coloring book? Which the coloring book was probably back in my day, the 70s, like 20 or 50 cents.
Hmm.
Comic books were a little bit more, I think like 75. Not really at that dollar point yet, but
Right.
it was hard for me to decide, hey, mom, I want this Hulk or I want this coloring book. What do I pick? Because my mom was always said, you pick one thing and one thing only, and she was a stickler. So
Yeah.
I agree with you on that. I think we need to see comic books more back in the stores, back at Barnes and Noble. I mean, Barnes& and Noble does have a big selection, but it's mostly graphic novels.
Hmm.
You don't see a lot of single issues there. Okay, my second question is, what current writers do you currently? What was it? I take that back. Let's go to the third question.
Okay,
I messed that one up. Sorry.
it's okay.
Do you feel it's okay to reboot any popular comic book hero to get the comic book to a younger audience again?
That's a dude. Now you're I might ruffle some feathers here, but I have never been a fan of the passing of the cape.
Hmm.
I feel like when Batman goes down, Nightwing should step up, and we should not Nightwing is Batman, but Nightwing is Nightwing.
Right,
I know I'm old school thinking there. Like, I mean, it's like, okay, well, when Darth Vader goes down, does is there a new Darth Vader? No.
right,
so, so I'm that guy that's like, no, I think when Batman goes down, he's down. But like that said, you can use Nightwing or even like Damien, who I think's become a pretty interesting character, Batman's son. Like, don't make him Batman, just make him who he is. Don't put him in the cape and cowl. Like, just make him his own character. And I think that's where you can draw in new readers, versus the, hey, let's come up with the next Batman and make him younger, or
right.
you know whatever you want to do there. And I think this they have done a decent job, I think, with that, with the Batman family.
Hmm.
Like there's Batgirl and Nightwing and Red Hood and who's the new character they just come out with that's got like the yellow bat outfit?
Oh,
I can't remember what they're calling them.
I
You guys
don't
can help
either.
me out.
I should have researched that one.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, Kelly actually worked on that one. I can't remember. I can't believe I can't remember that name. But like they did a really good job of like there's a really vast variety of different characters that I think you could get interested in.
Yeah,
Young, old. There's Batman there for you and me. And then hey, if you want Damien or Red Hood, you've got that.
right,
Or Nightwing's in between. So I think that's the way I would prefer that they approach it
right,
versus the like, oh, here's the next Superman or here's the next Cap or here's the next Wolverine. It's like, no,
right,
Laura should be her own character,
right.
you know.
I totally agree. I think I just read yesterday that I guess they're giving the writer that does Red Hood
Mm-hmm.
more leeway
Oh, nice.
and having Red Hood be on his own and not rely so much on Batman anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they're slowly trying to phase out Batman. Which I understand. They're trying to grow a new audience, and I was talking to a good friend of mine, Jay Bartlett. He loves Daredevil,
Mm-hmm.
and he says I like the old school Daredevil. I don't like this new Daredevil. I don't like because he said he didn't like the costume and he didn't like the way his presence was in the comic.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess ruffled a little feathers of him. He was like, I like the old school Daredevil, you know. And I think with new writers, they got to figure out what's working for
Mm-hmm.
the character. If you're going to do a new Daredevil and you're not doing the old Daredevil,
Yeah.
how do you not make the same mistakes? Well, that's not really a mistake, but how do you not copy the other writer from the past?
Right. I mean, how do you write a brand new story in something that hasn't been done before with Bruce Wayne Batman?
Right.
I mean, what are we talking, 75 years?
Yes.
Like it's like, oh, we're going to bring the Joker back. Well, that's never been done 100 times.
Right.
Like, so, yeah, I mean, that's tough, man. I mean,
Yeah.
especially when you're talking about a character that's been around for decades. How do you
Yeah.
step in and go, okay, how can I bring something fresh to Daredevil without repeating what's been done before?
Well, we know you did Batman. So how did you make your Batman different from other writers' Batmans?
Well, there was two different things. So I worked on Arkham Origins, and we were talking a little bit before the show. On that one, I was, it was a team of writers.
Hmm.
So we were doing a choose your own adventure Batman story. And so
Okay.
it was kind of fun because each of us got to like pick, like here's the timeline I want to play with.
Right.
And so it was for me like I got to deal with Dumb and Dumber. like the twins, um,
Yeah.
Tweedledee and Tweedledum.
Right.
Uh, and so that was, like, okay, I haven't seen anybody do a deep dive on these characters before.
Right.
And then in the Legends of the Dark Knight, it was more like I wanted to create a story that didn't deal with a previously existing villain. And so I think, sorry, I got cat hair all over me.
It's okay.
I think that what's interesting to me, and I could be totally wrong, but what's interesting to me about that, and I think you've seen Scott Snyder do this too, is
Yeah.
when you bring a fresh villain into a story, you
Mhm.
can develop new things that maybe Batman hasn't encountered before, maybe new questions he hasn't had to answer.
Right.
And so I think that was my approach, anyways. Like, well, what would he do in this circumstance? Because I haven't seen him face this before,
Right.
which I think is a little bit more difficult when you're dealing with, like, say, Two Face or Joker or Catwoman. It's tougher because they've been around so long and dealt with Batman so many times. You're like, well, what questions do they have left to answer?
Right. Do you think it's hard when a writer has been doing Batman for so long and you don't want to step over their shoes
Hmm.
and do something that maybe a new reader goes, I don't like what you just did with that Batman. I don't like that. I don't like that you put a female Robin
Hmm.
in place of the old Robin. Uh, I know some people got miffed with the female version of Robin, and so as a writer, how do you try not to piss off the reader and make the editor happy so he keeps on using you?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a tough one, right? Like, who
Right.
wants to follow like Frank Miller or Scott Snyder's Batman runs, right? Like, I mean, who wants to write Batman the week after Legend of the Dark Knight? Or Scott Snyder, I mean, whether you loved him or hate him, like, he had a monster run that was highly
Right.
successful.
Right.
And so who wants to follow that? But to kind of answer your question, like, what I've learned is you're not going to ever write anything that doesn't upset somebody.
Okay.
Somebody's not going to like your stuff. Somebody is going to hate your work. And
Gotcha.
that's okay. That's just part of the process. Like, no matter what you do, I mean, there's people that love Scott Snyder. There's people that hate Scott Snyder.
Right.
Look at Zack Snyder on the films. Like, there's people that love everything he did at DC, and there's people that are like, oh my god, if you ever bring him back, I'll kill somebody.
Right.
So, like, there's no way you're going to get around not upsetting people. What
Right.
you have to do is write the best story you possibly can and see what happens.
Okay. Here's something that I've been talking with other people in the GI Joe community,
Hmm.
and there's some people that are pissed off because that particular director, the Bonaventure
Oh yeah, yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
one, came out and said that Cobra Commander Hood looked like a Ku Klux Klan member. Now that pissed off a lot of people in the community because we
Yeah.
know that Hood is not a Ku Klux Klan member. Had
Right.
It's an executioner.
Hmm.
Hood. How do you feel about when a director is telling executives at a big company how to deal with their IP?
I mean, first off, yeah, I mean, unless they're in the process of doing that and they have any skin in the game, they should
Right.
just keep their opinions to themselves. But I do understand, like, I did some stuff when the Man of Steel movie was coming out,
Okay.
and one of the things I had in my story was Superman, classic, doing this, and they said, "Oh, Superman doesn't do that anymore." And I was
Mm.
like, "What do you mean Superman doesn't do that anymore?" And they're like, "The current film, we're not doing any of that. They have control over what Superman does in the comics now. You can't do that anymore."
You
I was like,
can't do this anymore.
yeah, I was like, "Well, that's just ridiculous." Like, for me as a fan, I was like, "No, that's what Superman does."
Right.
Classic, iconic. Like, you can never get away from that. I mean, football players do it now.
Right.
So, like, I mean, if they, he had skin in the game, so he's directing the Man of Steel movie and he's running the show, so I can understand where he would have some say in that. Obviously, it ended up being the wrong decision.
Right.
You know,
And I guess you're going to make people upset, and then maybe he's just not the guy for Hasbro or the vision of movies going
Right.
forward. Like they moved from away from Snyder and said to DC, "Hey, I got a new guy coming in, Gunn.
Yeah.
He's proven. Maybe we'll have him do it." And I'm kind of under the defense between Gunn and Snyder. I like Snyder more, but it's just my opinion.
Yeah.
And we all have opinions, and I'm sure there's people out there that don't like Snyder, love Gunn. But I wish him the best. But so far, from what I've seen, I mean, he did finish the Flash movie. I really didn't care for it. I,
Yeah. That one story wise was a little tough.
yeah,
It was a little rough.
yeah.
But I mean, Gunn on the first Guardians of the Galaxy is brilliant.
Oh, absolutely.
Peacekeeper, I absolutely adored. Like that was so much fun. I love that TV show.
Yeah,
But he's gonna have just like the rest of us, he's gonna have hits and misses. So we'll I mean they've given him the whole show, so we'll see what happens. Like now he's gotta prove himself.
yeah. Well, we'll see when Superman comes out.
Yeah, that's gonna be the big yeah. If he can't get Superman to go, he's gonna be in trouble.
Well, yeah, I
You
agree. Do you feel horror comic books are making a comeback with comic book readers today?
Oh, I think so. I definitely think so. What I found interesting is that about 70% of my audience
Yes.
is female. And so I think there's this huge undercurrent of female horror fans that nobody ever talks about our services. And so that is, I think, the secret to like getting more readers into comics is like, let's not just do, super masculine male characters that only dudes will follow. Like
Yeah.
in horror, I think appeals to a broader audience than just say the superhero community. And that's clear. Like if you look at the movies and TV, like that's just huge. And
Right.
so we've seen a lot of great horror comics come out, like Nailbiter, Beneath the Trees, everything Tony Fleece does, like Stray Dogs killed it. Feral is doing great. So I think there's a lot of great horror comics out there coming out now, and I love to see the resurgence, and because they're all so different. I forgot Ice Cream Man.
Right.
A lot of great horror comics out there right now that people are starting to pick up that are somehow maintaining an audience where other comics are struggling. So,
I really like your horror comic, Plastic.
oh, thanks.
I read it, issue one. I believe issue two is out now,
Oh, yeah, issue two's out now. Yep.
and I'm going to pick that up. But I really think um, writing style, artwork, and coloring what made that comic.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and that's hard to do in a horror comic because you're trying to set a tone, for the story, but also visually and color wise.
Hmm.
And I loved the different tones that you had. I don't know who the colorist is.
That's Michelle Madsen.
Okay,
Yep.
not very knowledgeable about her, but she has beautiful work.
Hmm.
So that was really great. The person that does my coloring for my comic book, hopefully it'll get out next year. I'm hoping.
Always
Um,
a fight, dude. It's always a fight.
but Frank William,
Hmm.
he does the coloring for my comic book, and I have a guy out of Rome who does all the drawing for my comic book, and he's really talented. Okay, now we're going to get into the future of comic
Uh-oh.
books, and I think people are going to get maybe a little offended by some of the questions, but I hope they understand where I'm coming from. Do you feel digital comic books will override physical comic books, and will they be around longer than the physical copies?
Man, that's a tough one because I'm going to throw in like not only the digital version that you see like on Comixology, but yeah, I think you can have this conversation without throwing in webtoons.
Right.
And webtoons right now is, I mean, click wise, is vastly outperforming, regular comics. I can tell you, like for me, digital comics are so low as far as sales are concerned that I'm not. It'll never overtake the print version. I think when we start with print and go to digital, the
Right.
opposite. I think could be interesting, like webtoons to print. So you,
Hmm.
what is it? Olympus lore. Yeah, my
Yeah.
brain's misfiring.
Yeah.
Went to print, did fantastic numbers, better than most American, made comics.
Hmm.
You've got manga, which is still killing it
Yes.
in our market. European comics, go do a totally different method. No digital, really sales wise there.
Right.
So I don't think digital will necessarily pass print anytime soon. I
Hmm.
mean, obviously, I think that could be the future, but um, I don't, decade, maybe 2 decades away before that happens.
Okay. I just feel like when you get a physical copy, the feel of the texture of the paper, the smell of it when it's first printed, it's like
Mhm.
you can't get away from that. You're feeling it and
Mhm.
looking at it, and you're going through the comic book. I think with digital, it's cool. You can click on next, next, but it's kind of boring. It's like, okay, I have the digital copy, but I would love that physical copy. You know, and I would pay more for a physical copy than a digital copy.
Oh yeah,
I think digital copies are like what, $2, $3
yeah.
at most, depending on, I guess, the company, Marvel, Image, the big names, Dynamite. Um, do you feel it's good for writers to do Kickstarters?
Oh yeah, I love Kickstarter. I think Kickstarter's. I mean, Kickstarter now, from the last report I read, and I'm going to give this to Charlie Stickney because he's the one that sent me the information.
Yeah.
Kickstarter now accounts for 30% of the American comic book industry.
Wow.
And so I think Kickstarter is a fantastic. Honestly, I think Kickstarter has a huge future. I think you're going to see more and more creators shifting over to that. Um, I think direct to consumer is what I like to call it. I know some people are like, oh, crowdfunding or begging for money, whatever you want to call it, but like
Right.
it's just another store.
Yeah.
Like when I go and buy stuff from Kickstarter, it's not necessarily because I'm like, oh, I want to support this. It's like, oh no, I want this in my collection.
Right.
So I think Kickstarter is going to be the future, a huge part of the future of comics.
Mm.
And I think the people that are like trying to deny it are just kind of like like when digital came around, they're like, oh, digital will never be a thing, and it's like no,
Right.
it's a thing. Kickstarter's here, and I think you're going to see a lot of creators moving over to that.
Yeah, I think that I see that too. Because I keep on when I go on Kickstarter and they say, "Hey, there's a new comic book coming out." I'm curious. I'm like, "Oh, let me go check it out." And I'm not very good at Kickstarter, so I'm looking at all these beautiful things that they're doing and these videos that they're coming to present the comic book, and I'm just like, "Wow, that's a lot of investing money because you have to first, you know, unless you're really really talented and can do everything."
Hmm.
It's hard for a writer to go, okay, because I've heard you say in another interview that you actually hired someone to help you with your social media,
Oh yeah.
and because you were taking too much time. Hey, I got to go over to Instagram. I got to go to LinkedIn. I got to go to YouTube. I got to do all this to promote my comic book, and it was taken away from your writing.
Hmm.
So I know how it feels because I'm doing a lot of all the media and all the telling people, "Hey, my comic book's coming out. This is here. Here's a Facebook group, so you can
Hmm.
see some of the images." And I've got a lot of good response from people, but it's a lot of work.
Oh, it is. Yep.
And if I could hire somebody, but I'm new as a writer, so it's like until you've have so many years experience as a writer, you worked for different companies, you're not going to be able to hire your own you know social media guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll be able to. Most of the time, it's been a good friend. I pay some. I don't pay them a ton of money. It's just say, hey, I
Right.
need your help for this next couple of months, and they
Right.
help you out. So I mean, you can help. Get people to. I'm not asking them to post as me. I'm
Right.
just like, hey, I need to help getting these things. Get. help me with post, getting these posts ready. Like what art do I need to show? Those kind of things.
Right.
So I mean, there's, I think you could do that now.
Right. Okay. My next question: what will be the future of comic book companies like DC, Marvel, Image, etc.? What is going to make them, evolve and not be stagnant?
Yeah, honestly, I think what you're seeing now, like Kickstarters are going to change. I mean, you're seeing the boom Kickstarter for Berserker did what, like almost 3 million.
Hmm.
You're seeing like Dynamite's doing them now. Clover Press is doing like the Art of Marvel books, and they're like, doing big money. The direct market right now is in a, it's suffering is more than we've seen it in a long time. So I think you're going to see like Marvel, DC, Image. They're all going to have to evolve because when you're putting out books and they're not making money,
Right.
you've got to change your game plan. And we can't just sell 16 different versions of Batman, and
Yeah.
14 different versions of X-Men and think that's going to support itself over decades. Um,
Right.
so I think there's a huge evolution coming. I don't know exactly what that looks like. It's kind of hard to predict,
Hmm.
but they're going to have to drift a little bit away from just depending on the floppy market.
Okay.
I think you're going to have to, I think the Black Label stuff was awesome.
Right.
Some they're going to have to do some things that are different. They're going to have to like test some things and see if it works or not.
Do you think writers going to more Comic Cons is going to help if they're working for a particular company like Marvel, like DC? Now, I know with Image, you own that intellectual property, but they help you put it out and print it. Do Image come to you and say, "Hey, I want you to go to this many Comic Cons to promote your new comic book," or how do they come about and ask you to promote it?
Oh, they don't. Yeah, so yeah, Marvel and DC really don't unless they're like every now and then, like with the big shows, like say New York Comic Con or San Diego Comic Con,
Right.
it might pick particular creators that they want to bring out because they're like, hey, right now Batman's hot or this title's hot.
Mm.
Um, Image is a different beast because they don't really pay you. You don't really work for them, kind of thing. It's like you're kind of working together.
Right.
So they don't really dictate. They might ask you if you're going, but they don't dictate or say, "Hey, we want you to go to this show," because they know that that means you're paying for it.
Hmm.
Marvel and DC can afford to fly you out and put you up. Image can't,
Right.
and so they don't really tell you what to do to help promote it. So it's kind of on you. Like you got to figure out what you want to do. And a lot of writers from Marvel and DC, they kind of handle their own. Like, hey, these are the shows I'm going to, versus Marvel or DC telling them to. Honestly, if it's just unless it's the two big guys, New York and San Diego,
Right.
they really don't.
Now, with your comic book plastic, I found it all over. Here locally in San Diego, a lot of comic books have your comic book,
That's good to hear.
and there's a section just for Image
Hmm.
comic books, and of course, it's a little hard to find particular writers or artists. And I usually go into this one off Claremont Mesa Boulevard. It's called Comic Craze.
Hmm.
And I said, "Do you have any Doug Wagner comic books?" And he's like, well, he's popular, but I have only a small section in the store for him." And I said, "Okay, you think it'll get bigger?" And he's like, "Well, he's a really good writer, so yes, I think we will see more." He says he buys more of your particular issues from Image, so that's a good thing.
Oh yeah, that's good to hear.
But do you go out and try to go to comic book stores and say, "Hey, please, buy so many issues of my comic book. Here's a free copy."
Oh yeah. I mean, with Plastic Death and Dolls #1, I had a retailer variant that I sent out before
Mhm.
final order cutoff was out. So I sent that to that's coming. That price is coming out of my pocket. Um,
Right.
but yeah, I try to contact all the stores I possibly can because I'm no fool. I realize we're in a symbiotic relationship,
Right.
and comic shops don't exist without comics, and comic writers don't exist without comic shops.
Right.
So I need their help. So yes, every time I'm at a show, and I talk to different retailers and stuff, I immediately give them my card and say, "Hey, let's stay in touch so
Right.
that we can hold up, boy, so we can so we can stay in touch and kind of work
Yeah.
together." Because
Yeah.
I'm like, "Hey, let me know what you need. Whatever I can do to help, I'll help."
Yeah.
Like the more successful they are, the more successful I am, and vice versa.
Do you ever tell the comic book person, "Hey, if you buy so many copies of my comic book, I'll come here and you know write uh, sign comics for people." And
Yeah, I mean, we haven't gotten that far because I mean that's a tough one, right? So
yeah,
so for me to like let's use your hometown. So let's say
yeah,
San Diego. Like I mean, for me to fly to San Diego, put myself up, those kind of things. You're talking about several $100s.
right,
Let's be honest. Like comics are going to sell. The comic shop's not going to most likely sell that many copies of my comic to pay
right,
for that. So that's a tough one. But at the same time, like I'm like, hey, if you need signed copies for anybody in the store, let me know.
right.
Okay, big guy.
Yeah, I guess it is harder if it's not in your hometown and it's not a
Right.
local comic book shop. That's the reason I asked because when I went to the comic craze, I said, "Look, uh, I'm a new comic book writer, and I want to put my comic book in your comic book store." And he said I'm very selective, Chris, about who I put in my comic book store. And I said, okay. As soon as I showed him a big size poster of my first issue, he said yes. And I was surprised. And he says, when does it come out? And I said, well, we're still working on it. He said, do you have a big company? And I said, no, we're small. Um, I'll be honest with you. I would love to, we've talked and you told me how to pitch to get to Image and see if they were interested in that. But not a lot of companies are going to say, hey, I want Chris or
Right.
I want Doug for this comic book. You have to go out there and present yourself in a way that they want you badly, because they got tons of writers. They go, look, I got this guy over here for DC. I got this guy over at Marvel. Um, I believe there was a new female, Erica Schultz,
Oh
that
yeah, I know Erica. Yeah, she's really
yeah,
cool. Yeah.
she does all the Spawn now.
Yeah, she's doing Spawn. She's doing Daredevil, Woman Without Fear.
Wow, so
Yep.
she's doing a lot, and I
Yep.
guess she was an editor before too.
That I'm not sure of all her entire past. I know she's done some indie books, create her own books as well.
Right.
Um,
I just find it interesting that you have to have so many different hats in this
mm,
comic book industry. But I was surprised that Todd would let another writer do Spawn,
yeah.
and I guess she's an incredible writer. I haven't seen a lot of her stuff, so to me, she's still new. Um, okay, my fourth question is also in the future. Oh, I already said that. We already talked about the Kickstarter. I apologize.
That was good.
Do you think indie comics will do better than bigger comic book companies?
I think there's a good chance. Like I think what you're kind of even seeing now is like it's hard to say because of numbers. Once Diamond didn't have the monopoly, you don't really get good sales numbers on a regular basis.
Right.
But there has been rumors this year that Image has passed DC in sales.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I do think with like companies like Image and Boom and Dark Horse and IDW, like if they keep pushing forward,
Hmm.
Dynamite's one of them too. Like
Yeah.
these guys are doing some major shakeups. Like I mean, Dynamite, what they've done a couple of times now, and Boom on Kickstarter is pretty impressive. When you're talking a couple of $1 million on one issue, uh, that's Marvel and DC, would they're like, well, I wish I could do that.
Yeah, I was talking to Bobby Valla, and he said in a stream that he doesn't do enough Action Force comics to be interested in it for the long haul.
Hmm.
He still wants to do comics so he can sell his action figures.
Hmm.
Because there's a backstory to everything, and the comic book would help promote sales for his figures. But he said it costs more to do a comic book than for me to retool a new action figure, because you got a writer, you got a artist, you got the colorist, you got the people that does the lettering, you got the editor, and then you got to do all this promotion. And he said he feels like he spent more money on comics doing the comic stuff, and he felt he wanted to get a more on in his stable, bunch of writers, so he wouldn't have to worry about that
Yeah.
because he's wearing so many different hats.
Hmm.
He's creating the lore. He's creating you know the stuff that goes into the comic book, and I think he's working on a movie too.
Oh wow.
So he's got all these different hats.
Mhm.
I don't know how he does it, and I guess it's because of his years of experience at Hasbro. You
Yeah.
know, doing GI Joe and Marvel and Iron Man and all those action figures. And I'm glad that he's very successful. But he told me, Chris, you're not going to make a lot of money in comic books, but if you do it and you love it, I can't stop you from trying to put out your vision. But
Yeah.
for him, he hates comic books.
I mean, that's hey, some people don't like it. That's I mean, he's not wrong in the fact that like there isn't a lot of money in comics. Like you have to love doing it because it's not like it's going to make you an instant millionaire. I mean, obviously the Image guys made that happen back in the day, but that's not the current market. And so, the odds of you making money on a comic is pretty low. It's
Yeah.
hard to make it be successful.
Yeah. Who would you like to work with in the future as far as artists or writers?
Man, that's a really long list. There's so many great artists running around now. I mean, Sean Gordon Murphy, Greg Capullo, Matteo Scalera, Eric Canetti. Just off the top of my head, those are some major guys. John Boy Myers. Would love to work with people I've worked with already, like Adam Hughes, and working on a new book with Doug Dabbs. Always working with Daniel Hilliard. Um, the list is immense. Like there's so many incredible, wonderful artists out there that I would love to get a chance to work with.
I think he also worked with Brian Stilfreeze.
Oh yeah, yep.
I really like his work, and I think people, if they're aware of his work, he's done. I think uh, Miles Morales.
Yeah, Brian's done so much.
Yeah,
Like you know,
I just don't know all the stuff he's done, but I
yeah,
just
he's probably best known for his Batman work. Domino. He did Dayman for Boom.
okay. I got a question from Gaz.
Yeah.
The question is for Mr. Wagner: if you could choose any character in a comic book world to write, for which character would it be?
Whew, that's a tough one. I mean, what I'd really like, if you're talking about like typical Marvel and DC, if you're going for the big two, I would love if they'd give me a character that they're not really using a lot of and turn them into somebody. Um, but if you're saying, hey, like, what's your dream jobs? For me, in Marvel, it's Uncanny X-Men. So the X-Men. Um, I know that's not a single character, so that's kind of a little bit of a cheat. And then, dude, on DC, I have always had a love of old school Lobo. If I
Oh,
get a hold of Lobo and kind of go back and build them what Simon Bisley built, back when it was just like over the top and ridiculous, I would love a shot at Lobo.
oh yeah. I think I would like if I was going to do a DC character, it would be Green Arrow,
Oh yeah, Green Arrow is a cool character.
and I think I would take him back to his original spot where all this turmoil came in it, and kind of research it more
Hmm.
and why he became that way. I think it was back in DC. It was always you took this character and made them, either their parents are died and they're full of wealth,
Hmm.
which doesn't happen in the real world,
Yeah.
uh, and make them these happy billionaires or billionaires with so much trauma that they go in this different direction,
Hmm.
I think when CW did Green Arrow, they kind of borderline, with the comic book, and then did their kind of what their version was going to be of Green Arrow.
Right.
And I think it worked. I think when it first came out, people were like, I don't know. But when the season kept on going and you got into season two, people were like, I kind of like this Green Arrow. He's different.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was a successful TV show. There's no doubt about that. I mean, what was it like 6, 7 seasons?
9.
9. Wow. Yeah. I mean, you can't argue that kind of success.
Yeah. And then the guy that did Green Arrow said he would never do another superhero comic book show because it was so demanding on him physically,
Wow.
mentally. And he said, I just wanted to get away from that. And that's why after 9 seasons, he said, I'm done.
Yeah.
I only can do so much with this character. But I think a lot of people wanted to see Flash from the CW
Hmm.
television show to be doing the DC movies. And they kept on saying that actor should have been the Flash and not Ezra Miller.
I'm with you. I kind of like what they did on the TV show better than what they did in the movies with the Flash.
Yeah,
The
I
costume
think
was about as close as you can get and still not make it look silly, in the TV show. And I love the how they talked about how the suit worked,
yeah,
and that character was great as the Flash. I mean, he was perfect.
yeah. I think it was great, and I think the CW did great, and I don't know why they stopped doing superhero shows. Maybe because the failure of I think it was um, Bruce Wayne's kind of story
Yeah.
as a young kid,
Hmm.
and when they did the Penguin kind of storyline, it was like not people's Penguin. It wasn't
Hmm.
what people envision. It wasn't like a Danny DeVito. I think they didn't get the essence of that comic book character, And
Yeah.
I think that's what did it for the CW. There was one comic book writer that people think um, got a miracle hit, and I don't know if it's true or not. The guy that wrote The Walking Dead.
Oh yeah, Robert Kirkman. Yeah.
Now, I heard in some interviews that his pitch wasn't very good to Image, but he kept on bugging him daily.
Yeah.
And that's when finally Image said, okay, show me what you got. And I think people at that time wanted something different. And of course, comics have done zombies forever, but
Hmm.
I think it was the story that he told with each different character in each comic book that he did that drew people in, you know, because, you're struggling and you got these zombies and you got different life choices.
I mean, what Robert did and pulled off is pretty amazing. I mean, think about this. Like he not only did a zombie comic, he
Yeah,
did a black and white comic in the middle of the color boom.
right.
Like, I mean, who does that? Like,
Not many.
no. And so, I mean, everything he did was just right time, right place. Like convincing Eric to do it. When Eric didn't want to do, Eric Stevenson in that Image, convincing him to do it when he didn't want to do it. Being that hard headed guy. I mean, if you've seen some of my interviews, a lot of people are like, "How did you make it in comics?" I'm like, "Because I'm hard headed." And
Yeah,
I just kept sending stuff. Like, until somebody said yes.
yeah,
And that's what Robert did. And then think, everybody's like, oh, overnight success, Robert Kirkman. And I'm like, no, like he did that comic for 15 years as he had a full-time job before it got picked up by AMC. And
oh,
so,
oh,
yeah, Gaz is right. Like he told Image, Eric made him change it so that it was an alien invasion instead of a zombie story.
oh,
But,
wow.
but Robert did it as a zombie story anyway.
Right.
So at least that's the story he tells online. And
Yeah,
so I mean, but a lot of people are like, oh, overnight success, blah blah. I was like, no. I mean, I knew Robert when he was struggling to
yeah,
make, to rub two pennies together, kind of thing.
right.
And he was still putting out his comics. He was still putting out Invincible and Walking Dead when they weren't selling well.
Wow.
And so it's like, yeah, I mean, 15 years on those two books
Yeah.
till they finally started making him good money.
Yeah, and I think people think there's instant success for him, and that wasn't the case.
Oh no.
He struggled,
Yes.
and I always tell people, you think it's easy to do a comic book. It's not.
Oh no. Yeah.
And I learned the hard way. I spent tons of money doing things the wrong way.
Yeah.
And I remember this one person saying, "Oh, I could be a good intern for you, and I know how to draw." And then I would give them the money, right, through PayPal. And then when I finally get the product, I'd be like, "I'm not happy with this."
Yeah.
And I hate to do this to the people, but it's better to come from me than someone else. I said, I don't think you're ready enough to produce what I need.
Yeah. That's fair.
And I said, no disrespect to you. Um, I think the more you do it, the better you become. But when someone tells me now that they are really good at artwork, I, I now I just say, look, I need to see your portfolio.
Yeah.
And they say, well, I don't have one yet. Okay, well, when you do, come back to me. And I'm not being mean. And I think people take it the wrong way. But even as writers, we get rejected.
Oh yeah. Constantly.
Yeah, I probably could send my stuff to you, and you could look at it and be like, eh,
Yeah. You don't know.
yeah. You could say, hey, Chris, I like it, but it's not my style.
Yeah.
It's not something that I would be interested in.
And that's fair, right? I mean, and it's I think writer to writer, you have to take that into account when you're sending in your pitches and getting rejected. Just because one editor hates it doesn't mean the next editor isn't going to love it.
Right.
Taste. There's no right or wrong here. They can't tell you whether it's a good comic or not. It's a good comic in their opinion. That's it.
Yeah. And I think what you told me, I took it to heart, was the way you do the pitch, Chris. If you come off and your pitch is very well received and it's detailed, and you explain the backstory, and you explain the character well, and you show them the drawings and all that. So if you have all your ducks in a row, that's going to sell them to you. And I think that's helped me because your advice, you've been doing it for so long, you know instantly what's going to work and what's not going to work.
Well, I don't know if I'd say I know what's going to work and what's not going to work.
Right.
that's that's still always a guess and always terrifying. Every time a book comes out, I'm not sure what I did is going to work or not. You never know. Um, and what I find so surprising, and this happens at every show I go to, I have writers, or I should say, potential writers, potential artists who come up and say stuff like what you and Matt are talking about here. What Matt's kind of commented about is like they'll come up to me and go, "Hey, I'm a comic book artist. Will you hire me?"
Right.
I'll say the same thing you just said. I'll say, "Well, show me your portfolio."
Right.
And they're like, "Well, I don't have a portfolio. I haven't drawn comics before." And I go, "Well, then you're not a comic book artist."
Yeah.
And I have writers that come up and they're like, "Hey, how do I get a job as a writer?" I'm like, "You have to write. Do you have something to show me?" "Oh, I haven't written anything yet." "Well, then you're not yet a writer."
No, no.
It's like, yeah. I mean, what Matt's saying is, I don't know, like, they might ask the professional questions like, you know, show me your portfolio, but like that's the first question that always comes out of my mouth is they're like, "Hey, here's some pinups I've done. I think I could draw a comic." I'm
Right.
like, "Draw some pages and come back to me."
Right.
Because until you've drawn a page and you can prove that you can do it, you can't.
Right. And I've seen some good work, and I've seen some horrible work.
Oh yeah.
I've seen some people do. I think they have help with AI now, and the
Yeah.
AI drawings. And I look at it and I said, "You didn't do that." And they're like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "I can tell. I'm not a great artist, but I can tell what's been penciled and inked and what's AI."
Yeah.
And I said, "You're giving me this, and I gave you how much money?"
Yeah.
I said, "It looks beautiful, but then when people, if I print it, they're going to go, that's not real."
Yeah, if they I mean, you don't wanna get into the, AI stereotype right now as far as, like, comics and that kinda stuff. You'll
Yeah,
the industry will completely turn on you.
yeah. And I just feel like with today artists, I feel like they need to get their feet wet a little bit because I had a friend named Dave Sagoin. He was a great, great artist. He went to Todd McFarlane at a comic convention, and I think this was early '90s. He showed his whole portfolio to Todd McFarlane, who took his gracious time out of his
Mhm.
busy schedule. He looked at David Sagoin and said, "I like what I see, but it's." I guess he told him it's not comic book style,
Yeah.
and which I didn't understand. I go, "What do you mean it's not comic book style?" He said he felt like it was too much detail in certain areas, and that maybe he should over exaggerate some stuff when he's drawing. And I didn't understand that. I was like, well, I like your stuff, but I guess it's just that's one person's opinion,
Exactly. He could have taken that same portfolio to Jim Lee, and Jim Lee was like, "I love this. Do you wanna work for DC?"
right?
Like, you just don't know. I
Yeah,
like Gaz's comment, like, true, most artists just want to do covers, and I can't tell you how many people I talk to who are like, "Oh, I just wanna be a cover artist." And I'm like, "Well, that's I mean, it happens, but it's rare, but, like,
yeah,
that's not how you start out usually." But, what do
yeah.
I know?
And I've been so lucky with the contacts I've had over, just developing in my comic book, to work with Alex Sanchez.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he could have said, "Hey, I want $600 or $700 for just a front cover," and oh, that's my friend Zazel from Australia.
Nice.
He's a big Sergeant Slaughter fan.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he met him a couple of years back at Joe Fest. So everybody did a GoFundMe thing. He didn't have the funds to travel from Australia to meet, and so everybody did a GoFundMe thing, and he got a chance to ticket to Joe Fest, and
Oh, that's awesome.
he met his idol.
Yeah,
So and
that's great.
spent time with him at his place.
Oh, wow.
I think it's his daughter's home, and maybe Zazel can put in the comments in the chat what actually happened. But I've been so lucky to work with Alex Sanchez and to talk with so many different professionals like yourself. And I think you guys have been gracious, to give me an opportunity to spread my wings and say, hey, maybe your things are not good right now, but keep on doing what you're doing and don't give up. And I think that's the advice you gave me. And you said, hey, when I'm not busy, I would love to see what you've written.
Mhm.
And I know you are a very busy man, and I do appreciate everything that you've told me. And um, I hope when it's all said and done, and I get my comic book out there, maybe in the future you and me could work together.
Oh, yeah, dude, it'd be it, yeah. I'm so excited to see, I'm hoping it like you said, you stay on schedule. That's always
Yes.
tough. I know how that works, that's everyday life for me.
Yeah, I
But,
think what has stopped me was my mom's death
oh,
and
yeah?
dealing with all those legal issues and everything. But that's going to be finalized this month. So I have a sister that's battling me over mom's estate, and
Mhm.
she didn't have a will. So unfortunate. But my thing was to have the comic out by the new year around April or March. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's going to happen because we're still working on the interiors. I got the
Mhm.
cover done, got the inside done, all the character designs were done, and Alex did three of them
Oh,
concept.
nice. Yeah.
He did David Drake, the main character, and he did Gwen and Amy. Gwen is a friend of David Drake's, and Amy is the, I guess, the coroner that oversees the dead bodies. So, Dead Tarklaw, thanks for coming by. It says, Chris, this was a great interview. Loved the conversation between the two of you. Hope you do more of these soon. Well, yes, I will be doing more of these soon. I'm waiting for Alex Sanchez to get back from vacation. Hopefully, I can get even Bobby Valla and talk some comics and be on my stream. But, Doug, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, dude. Thank you so much for having me on here. I enjoyed it.
I loved everything you said, and I think everybody's enjoyed this interview,
I hope so.
and I appreciate it. So before you go, tell everybody where they can get your comic book at,
Oh yeah.
and what are the promotions you're doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Plastic Death and Dolls is the current floppy, individual issues that's coming out. Two just came out. Three, I think, comes out in another week or two. I can't ever keep track of the schedule. But obviously, I've got a lot of trades and stuff out as well through Image Comics. That's usually the easiest way to find my work. Obviously, you can find it at your local comic shop or at Amazon.com. The obvious ways. And then if you want to track me down on socials, like I'm pretty good about responding to messages and those kind of stuff. So let's see. I think I got a card here that tells me to reminds me what my stuff is. So Doug.Wagner13 at Facebook and Instagram, and then Doug_Wagner at Twitter. Well, I'll still call it Twitter. I'm always going to call it Twitter, but but yeah, those are the ways to find me and buy my books at comic shops and stuff. So
Yeah, before we go, Zazel says, I don't even have the ability to even draw a stick figure.
guilty.
Huge respect to all artists. And Gaz, thanks, Chris, for the interview. Mr. Wagner, thank you for coming on and talking with us.
My pleasure. My pleasure, guys.
And we're going to end this stream. Like I said, thank you, Doug. I really appreciate it. And I keep on writing these great horror comics. I'm a big fan of them. And I hope one day to work with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. You have a good rest of your night.
All right, you too.